The Kola Peninsula did not forgive mistakes. Here, beyond the Arctic Circle, where the sun was a rare and stingy guest, and the ground froze to a depth that even Soviet geologists could not measure, nature ruled by its own laws. Cruel, primeval, written in ice and stone. Man here was a tolerable intrusion, nothing more. His machines broke down from the frost, his plans collapsed from sudden snowstorms, and his self-confidence melted faster than snow under the rare Arctic sun. Geological Dr. Valentin Sergeyevich Krulov knew this. He had lived in these parts for long enough to learn to read the signs. How the wind behaves before a snowstorm, what the color of the sky indicates, when it is worth setting up camp, and when it is better to move away from the deceptively calm slopes. But even he, a man with 30 years of field work experience, looked at the map in front of him with undisguised anxiety. December 1986 was particularly harsh. The polar night enveloped the Kibani Mountains in a thick, almost tangible darkness that did not dissipate for months. The temperature dropped to levels at which metal became as brittle as glass, and breath turned into ice crystals before it could leave the lungs. In such weather, normal people sat by the stove, drank tea, and waited for spring. But they were not normal people. They were Soviet scientists, and Soviet scientists had plans and deadlines. Comrade Krulov, the Meteorological Service, is issuing a warning about an approaching cyclone, reported junior researcher Igor Ermakov, handing over a sheet of paper with a weather report. Winds speed up to 30 meters per second. Visibility is practically zero. Krulov took the paper, not taking his eyes off the topographic map spread out on the folding table. Their target was marked in red pencil, a site deep in the Kibani Massif, off the beaten track and off the geological surveys. A place that the local Sami avoided and called Sit, Deadland. We'll postpone the exit for a day, he decided, although each delay was hard on him. The Ice Shield expedition had been planned since the spring, but the bureaucratic machine, as usual, was working slowly. Approvals, visas, equipment, all this took half a year, and now that they had finally reached the place, nature seemed to be deliberately putting spokes in their wheels. He looked up at his team, gathered in the only warm corner of the barracks that served as their temporary base. 6 of them, not counting himself, each of them a top-notch specialist handpicked by him for this mission. Igor Ermakov, his deputy, is a young but promising geologist from Moscow State University, the author of several revolutionary works on cryogenic mineral formation. Light, almost childish eyes and a habit of gnawing the end of a pencil when he was thinking. Anna Pavlovna Vorontsova is the only woman in the group, a speleologist with 20 years of experience, who has explored caves from Crimea to Kamchatka. Sinewy, dry, with a weathered face and nerves of steel. At the academy, she was called Iron Anna behind her back. She was proud of this nickname. Oleg Viktorovich Basov is a geophysicist, a calm, methodical man with a rare ability to make the most capricious devices show the truth. His seismograph could detect an underground tremor thousands of kilometers away, and his magnetometer could find an iron needle in a haystack. Mikhail Zorin is a documentary photographer assigned to an expedition to create a scientific photo archive. He is frail and nervous, but has an incredible eye for the shot. His photographs have graced the covers of Science and Life and Technology for the youth. Pavel Ogritsov is a young speleologist, a student of Vorontsova, for whom this expedition was the first serious test. A strong Siberian guy who knew no fear and was ready to climb into any hole in the ground. And finally, Major German Alexeyevich Shestakov, the customer's representative, a man from the military department whose job it was to make sure the expedition did not deviate from its goals. Officially, he was listed as a security consultant. Unofficially, he was a curator for those people in uniform who financed this venture. Comrades, Krulov began, rising from the map. Before we move out to the objective, I must once again remind you of the nature of our work. He took a folder marked for official use only from his tablet and opened it. Officially, we are here to search for new deposits of apatite nepheline ores. This is what is written in our travel documents. This is what the geological department knows. But the true purpose of the expedition is somewhat broader. Major Shestakov nodded, indicating that it was time to move on to the closed portion of the briefing. 3 months ago, representatives of the local administration approached us with unusual information. Reindeer herders from the Kirov Collective Farm reported a strange anomaly in the area of Lake Sadazero. According to them, there's a cave there inside which the temperature never rises above -15 degrees, even in the height of summer. The ice in this cave, according to them, has an unusual dark blue color and does not melt under any circumstances. Ermakov raised an eyebrow. Permafrost in these latitudes is commonplace. What's abnormal about that? That this cave is below the groundwater level, Krulov replied. That locals have been avoiding it for centuries. And that satellite thermal imaging shows a persistent temperature anomaly in the area. Basov leaned forward, his eyes lighting up with professional interest. What kind of anomaly? A cold spot. A patch of land about a hectare in size, the temperature of which is 3 to 4 degrees lower than the surrounding background. Constantly, regardless of the time of year and weather conditions. Vorontsova chuckled skeptically. An underground river, or a karst cavity with good ventilation. Perhaps, Krulov agreed. That's exactly what we have to find out. But there's one more thing. He turned the page in the folder. Major Shestakov represents the interests of the General Staff. In recent years, our military colleagues have shown increased interest in non-standard natural phenomena, especially those that may have practical application. The Major, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. His voice was even devoid of emotion. In the conditions of the growing confrontation with NATO, any technological advantage can prove decisive. If this anomaly is artificial in nature or can be reproduced, the motherland must be the first to know about it. Silence fell over the barracks. Everyone present understood. They were not just going on a scientific expedition. They were going on reconnaissance into the territory of the unknown. The wind howled outside the window, and the old boards creaked under its pressure. Frost crept through the cracks, despite the heated stove. Krulov looked at his watch, almost midnight, the time when the Arctic cold became especially vicious, penetrating under the skin, into the bones, into the very soul. I suggest you all get a good night's sleep, he said, closing the folder. Tomorrow we have a long journey ahead of us, and I don't know what we'll find at the end of it. But he was lying. Deep down, in the place where a seasoned geologist kept his most troubling premonitions, he knew they would find something that would change their notions of what was possible, something that was best left untouched. The wind outside the window grew stronger, turning into a long, mournful howl. And in this howl, as it seemed to Krulov, he could hear the voice of the northernmost land, warning them of danger. But warnings, as he well knew, rarely stop scientists. And Soviet scientists never. The morning was unusually clear. The sun, dim and distant, like a forgotten star, barely broke through the low clouds, casting long, bluish shadows on the snow. The temperature rose to -22 for December on the Kola Peninsula. This was almost resort weather. Krulov, who woke up earlier than everyone else, stood at the barracks window and looked at the frost-covered mountains. Today they were heading towards their goal. The preparation took 2 hours. Each device was checked 3 times. Each rope was felt by hand. In expeditions, such trifles do not happen. One unnoticed crack in a carabiner, one dead battery in a flashlight, and a scientific mission turns into a rescue operation. The path to the anomalous zone ran through a terrain cut by gorges, where ancient glaciers had left their traces in the form of sharp stone ridges and deep holes. The Buron snowmobiles struggled to make their way between the boulders, their engines roaring in the thin air. Shestakov, sitting in the sled behind the equipment, periodically glanced at the GPS navigator, one of the few Western innovations that the military allowed him to take on the expedition. "The coordinates match," he shouted over the roar of the engine. "Another kilometer north." They stopped at the foot of a rocky slope. From here, they had to go on foot. They left the snowmobiles at a large stone, which the local Sami called the Guardian Stone. According to legend, it guarded the entrance to the spirit world. Looking at this gloomy, ice-covered block, Krulov thought that the ancient people had a pretty good sense of dangerous places. The climb took half an hour. They walked in a single file, clearing a path in the deep snow. Vorontsova, as the most experienced in mining, went first, plunging an ice axe into the slope and checking the reliability of each step. Krulov followed, then the others. Major Shestakov brought up the rear, his machine gun hanging from a belt behind his back. Officially, for protection from bears. Unofficially, in case the expedition encountered something that was not a bear. They sensed the anomaly before they saw it. At first, it was a barely noticeable change in the quality of the air. It became denser, heavier. Breathing became difficult, as if the atmosphere had thickened. Then they noticed that their lanterns were starting to glow dimmer, even though the batteries were fresh. Their compasses were spinning, as if their needles had gone crazy. And the temperature, which should have dropped with altitude, began to rise. -18, reported Yermakov, looking at the thermometer. Even higher up the slope, -15. This contradicts all the laws of physics. They came out onto a flat area formed by an ancient landslide, and they saw it. The cave entrance gaped in the rock like a black hole, from which cold seemed to ooze. But it was not the usual cold of an Arctic winter. It was something else, a thick, almost tangible presence that made the heart clench and the blood run cold in the veins. "Oh my God," Basov exhaled. The edges of the entrance were covered in ice, but not the usual white or clear ice they had seen thousands of times. This ice was a deep, rich blue, unlike anything found in nature. It looked like ink spilled on water or the blood of mythical creatures. It seemed to glow from within, emitting a soft, hypnotic glow. The Sami knew what they were talking about. Vorontsova muttered, not taking her eyes off the entrance. "This is truly a dead land." Krulov took a field thermometer out of his backpack and headed for the entrance. The temperature grew with each step. -14, -10. Right at the entrance, the device showed -12 degrees. In December, beyond the Arctic Circle, in the depths of the cave, this was an anomaly that did not fit into any framework. "Let's try to get in," he said, taking a blowtorch out of his backpack. Carefully, one at a time, Vorontsova entered first. Her silhouette dissolved into the bluish darkness, as if the cave had swallowed her. Then they heard her voice, distorted by the echo. "Valentin Sergeyevich, you must see this." One by one, they descended into the cave. What they saw made them forget all scientific theories and hypotheses. The cave was enormous, the size of a concert hall. Its walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in the same blue ice they had seen outside. But here, its glow was brighter, more intense. The entire grotto was bathed in a ghostly light that didn't come from any one source, but seemed to emanate from the ice itself. But that wasn't the most amazing thing. In the walls, under the thickness of the ice, they saw silhouettes. Plants, entire thickets of some ancient, unknown species of flora, preserved in the ice with such precision that one could discern the veins on the leaves and the texture of the bark. Paleobotanical specimens, Yermakov whispered, his voice shaking with excitement. But they should have disappeared millions of years ago. How could they have survived? Zoran was already taking out his camera. The click of the shutter echoed loudly in the silence of the grotto. The flash brightly illuminated the ice walls for a moment, and then it became clear that the plants were not simply preserved. They seemed to live their own lives, slowly moving in the thickness of the ice like seaweed in water. Basov set up his geophysical instrument on a tripod and turned it on. The indicator needles danced like crazy. The magnetic field here is completely chaotic, he reported. The electromagnetic radiation is off the charts. And the gravimetric readings. This can't be happening. What exactly? Asked Krulov. The device shows that the mass of this piece of land is greater than it should be, as if there is an object with a density greater than that of lead underneath us. But this is impossible. Ogrtsov, who had been staring at the ice walls in fascination, took a step forward and extended his hand to the nearest patch of ice. Pavel, don't! Krulov shouted, but was too late. The young caver's palm touched the blue surface. At that moment, his face contorted, not from pain, but from something much worse, from the feeling that the very life was being sucked out of him. He jerked his hand away, but it was too late. The skin on his palm had become waxy, pale. His fingers trembled. What do you feel? Vorontsova asked, running up to him. Cold, Pavel whispered, but not outside. Inside, as if someone is turning me off from the inside. The battery is dying. Zoran, oblivious to what was happening, continued to photograph. Another click of the shutter. Another flash. In the bright light, they saw something that made their hearts skip a beat. For a moment, it seemed to them that the plants in the ice moved, turned their ancient, dead faces toward them. Valentin Sergeyevich, Shestakov's voice was tense. The radio is not working. Complete silence on all frequencies. Krulov tried to call the base. All that came out of the speaker was the hiss of static. They were cut off from the world. The temperature is dropping, Ermakov said, looking at the thermometer. -14, 15, 16. But that wasn't the worst thing. The worst thing was that they felt their strength slowly but surely draining away. Not from the physical cold, but from something deeper. As if the very life energy was leaving their bodies, being sucked into the blue walls of the grotto. We must leave, said Krulov. Immediately. But when they tried to move towards the exit, it turned out that it was not so easy. Their legs became weak, their movements slow. Every step was difficult. Zoran, still holding the camera, suddenly stopped. Look, he whispered, pointing to the photo he had just taken. The photograph showed Ogrtsov's hand reaching toward the ice wall. But the hand in the picture was translucent. Blue ice showed through its contours. This is impossible, Basov said. In this place, many things are impossible, Krulov answered gloomily. They left the cave, but the feeling that something had changed did not leave them. The blue ice had left its mark not only on the photographs, it had left its mark on their souls. And with each passing minute, that mark became deeper. Outside, in the freezing air, they greedily gulped oxygen. But even here, far from the cave, the cold continued to live inside them. Especially in Ogrtsov. His hand, touching the ice, became pale and almost lifeless. What's happening to us? Asked Ermakov. Krulov looked at the entrance to the cave, from which blue light was still streaming. I don't know, he admitted, but I'm afraid we'll find out soon enough. The second dive into the cave was much harder for them than the first. It was as if the air itself resisted their presence, becoming thick and viscous like molasses. Krulov noticed this immediately. Every breath required effort. Every step forward was achieved at the cost of inhuman tension. But scientific curiosity, that damned passion that drove generations of researchers towards the unknown, was stronger than the instinct of self-preservation. This time they were prepared. Basov was dragging a portable power station and a set of powerful spotlights. Zoran had loaded up with extra lenses and film. Vorontsova had grabbed climbing gear for the descent into the deep parts of the grotto. They all understood that what they had seen yesterday in passing, in the dim light of the lanterns, required detailed study. A discovery of such magnitude could revolutionize not only paleobotany, but also the very foundations of the evolution of life on Earth. The blue ice greeted them with the same hypnotic glow. But now, when Basov turned on the generator and the bright light of the spotlights flooded the cave, they saw the full grandeur of what nature had hidden in these depths for millennia. "Oh my God," Vorontsova exhaled, and her voice, usually firm and confident, wavered. Before them stretched an underground kingdom that should not exist. The walls of the cave went down hundreds of meters, forming huge halls and passages. And every square centimeter of this space was covered in ice. But not just ice, a living museum of vanished eras. Entire forests of prehistoric plants were enclosed in the thickness of the blue crystal, as if in amber. Giant ferns with leaves as tall as a man. Tree-like horsetails whose trunks reached the ceiling of the grotto. Seed plants of unprecedented shapes, with flowers and fruits that could decorate the gardens of alien worlds. All this splendor was preserved with such precision that one could see the veins of the leaves, the texture of the bark, even the drops of dew on the petals. "Carboniferous," Ermakov whispered, his eyes glowing with fever. "This is carboniferous flora? But how? How could it have ended up here? These species disappeared 300 million years ago." Krulov was silent, trying to comprehend what he had seen. His scientific experience told him that such preservation of organic matter over geological epochs was physically impossible. Even in permafrost, organic tissues disintegrate in thousands, tens of thousands of years at most. And here before them were plants hundreds of millions of years old, preserved as if they had been frozen yesterday. Zoran, without saying a word, began taking photographs. The clicks of a shutter echoed in the silence of the grotto like gunshots. Each flash illuminated the ice walls for a moment, and then something even more astonishing became visible. The plants in the ice were moving. It was barely noticeable, a slow, almost imperceptible movement of branches, the turning of leaves towards the light. As if the ancient forests had not died, but had only slowed down their life to the limit, preserving some incredible minimal vitality. "Valentin Sergeyevich," Basov's voice was tense. "The instrument readings are off the scale. The magnetic field here is 10 times stronger than the Earth's. Electromagnetic radiation, it pulsates, like a heartbeat." "The heartbeat of what?" Krulov asked, although deep down he was afraid of the answer. "I don't know, but the frequency matches human biorhythms, as if something huge and alive synchronizes with our life processes." Major Shestakov, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke up. "There are references to similar anomalies in the military archives. During the war, the Finns reported strange events in Lapland. Entire units disappeared in the forest and were found weeks later, alive but devastated, like batteries from which the acid had leaked." Ogrtsov, who felt unwell after touching the ice yesterday, sat down on a stone. His face was pale, There were dark circles under his eyes. Pavel, how are you feeling? Vorontsova asked. It's weird, he said, struggling to find the words. It's like I'm running out of power. Remember those old flashlight batteries? The light is bright at first, then it dims, and then it goes out. That's me too. My strength is waning, and I have no desire to do anything. I just want to lie down and switch off. Krula became worried. Ogritsov's symptoms did not resemble overfatigue or mountain sickness or ordinary hypothermia. This was something else, something that sucked the very life energy out of a person. Anna, take his pulse, he ordered. Vorontsova placed her fingers on the young speleologist's wrist. Her face lengthened. 42 beats a minute. It's almost a coma. But I'm conscious. Ogritsov objected weakly. I'm just very tired, as if I'd worked 3 shifts in a row. Only it's not my body that's tired, but something else. My soul, maybe. Zoran, who had been taking photographs, suddenly stopped. He looked at the newly developed photograph with an expression of horror. What's there? Asked Krulov. Pavel, the photographer's voice trembled. Look at this. The photograph showed Ogritsov sitting on a rock, but his silhouette was blurred, translucent. The blue ice of the wall behind him shone through his body, as if the young man was slowly dissolving, becoming part of the surrounding space. It's a filmed effect. Yermakov tried to rationalize what was happening, or a problem with the shutter speed. No, Zoran shook his head. The rest of the shots are normal. Only Pavel is blurry. And with each new shot, he becomes more and more transparent. Basov, without looking up from the instruments, added, the bioelectrical activity in this part of the cave is falling. It's as if something is absorbing the energy of all living objects within range. At that moment, something happened that made them all fall silent. One of the ancient ferns in the ice slowly turned its branch toward Ogritsov. The movement was barely noticeable, but unmistakable. The plant, dead for 300 million years, was reacting to the presence of a living person. We're leaving, Krulov said sharply. Immediately. Pavel, can you go? I'll try, he nodded weakly. But when they tried to leave the cave, it turned out that it was not so easy. Ogritsov could barely drag his feet, and the other members of the expedition also felt a strange weakness. Each step towards the exit was taken with great difficulty, as if they were not walking on solid ground, but in a swamp that was pulling them deeper and deeper. The worst part was that the exit seemed further and further away. It was as if the cave was stretching, growing in size. Or was it their perception of space that was distorted along with their other senses? Don't stop, Krulov commanded hoarsely. Whatever happens, go toward the light. They came out when the sun was already setting behind the horizon. It was 4 in the evening, but it seemed to them that they had been inside for an eternity. Ogritsov fell into the snow just outside the cave and lay there, breathing heavily in the steam. Pavel? Vorontsova leaned over him. Better, he whispered. The fresh air is better. But look at my hand. He held out the palm of his hand that he had touched the ice with the day before. The skin on it was waxy, almost white. The veins were visible, like those of a very old person. And the worst thing was that his hand was cold. Not just cool, but icy, as if the blood in it had frozen. Zoran silently handed Krulov the last photo taken in the cave. It captured the moment of their exit. But in the photograph, Ogritsov looked like a ghost. His figure was barely discernible, dissolved in the surrounding space. What's happening to us? Asked Ermakov. Krulov looked at the entrance to the cave, from which blue light was still streaming. Ancient plants and the thickness of the ice continued their slow, dead existence. And somewhere in the depths of the grotto, something huge, invisible, was beating, feeding on the life force of all living things. I think, he said slowly, We found something that shouldn't have been found, something that would have been better left untouched. But it was too late. The cave had tasted them, and now it wasn't going to let them go. The fourth day in the anomaly zone became a turning point. What at first seemed like ordinary fatigue from working in extreme conditions turned into something much more sinister and inexplicable. Krulov, waking up in a sleeping bag on the fourth morning, felt as if his body was filled with lead. Every movement was incredibly difficult, as if he was rising from a deep, viscous sleep that did not want to let him go. But worse than the physical weakness was something else. The memory lapses. He remembered writing something important in his field diary the night before, but he couldn't remember what it was. He remembered the conversation with Basov about the instrument readings, but the words slipped through his fingers like sand. Time began to flow strangely, sometimes slowing to a painful crawl, then speeding up so that whole hours disappeared from his memory, leaving only a vague sense that something had happened. Having climbed out of the tent, he saw the other members of the expedition. The picture was depressing. Ermakov was sitting by the extinguished fire and staring blankly at his hands, as if he was seeing them for the first time in his life. Zoran was mindlessly twisting the camera in his hands, having forgotten how to use it. Vorontsova, always collected and energetic, was lying in her sleeping bag and could not force herself to get up, although she was fully conscious. Anna Pavlovna, how are you feeling? Krulov asked, approaching her. Bad, she replied in a weak voice. Valentin Sergeyevich, what's happening to us? I feel as if I were 80 years old. Everything hurts. I have no strength. I can hardly think. But I've been in the mountains all my life, accustomed to the cold and stress. Basov, the only one who was still relatively functional, bent over his instruments. His face was pale and his hands were visibly shaking, but scientific discipline forced him to continue his observations. Valentin Sergeyevich, he called to Krulov, you must see this. Krulov approached him. Strange waves danced on the screen of the portable oscilloscope. This is the bioelectrical activity of our group, Basov explained, his voice hoarse with fatigue. I started monitoring 3 days ago when I noticed the first symptoms in Obertsov. Look, here are the normal readings from the first day. And here are yesterday's and today's. The graphs were telling. Bioelectrical activity was steadily declining. What 3 days ago corresponded to the normal vital signs of healthy people now resembled the cardiogram of the dying. But that's not the scariest thing, Basov continued. Look at the frequency characteristics. Our biorhythms synchronize with the pulsation of the ice in the cave. We turn into resonators. The ice tunes us to its frequency, and our life energy flows to it. That's nonsense. Yermakov objected weakly. Ice can't be alive. It's a mineral, a crystal lattice. Ordinary ice, yes, Basov agreed. But this ice has an anomalous structure. My measurements show that its crystal lattice is organized according to a principle that is found only in living organisms. A fractal, self-sustaining structure. It grows, feeds, and it seems reproduces. Krulov felt a chill run down his spine. If Basov was right, they were not dealing with a geological phenomenon, but with a life form. Ancient, alien, deadly. How much time do we have? He asked. Basov looked at the graphs. At this rate of degradation, maybe 2 or 3 days. After that, we simply won't be able to move. And then, he didn't finish, but everyone understood. After that, there would be a slow, inevitable death from exhaustion. Major Shestakov, who had previously tried to establish contact with the base, approached them. His military bearing had disappeared. He moved like an old man, dragging his legs with difficulty. No contact, he reported. Complete silence on all channels. I try to access emergency frequencies. Same result. Either the anomaly is jamming all radio signals, or what? Asked Krulov. Or we're in a zone where the normal laws of physics do not apply. There are mentions of such cases in military archives. During the war, several reconnaissance groups disappeared in similar circumstances. They were found weeks later, alive, but completely exhausted, like squeezed lemons. Ogertsov, who now spent most of his time in a state of half-sleep, suddenly opened his eyes. I can hear them, he whispered. Boo! Vorontsova became alarmed. Plants. In the ice. They whisper. They call. They say that the pain will soon end. That you could just let go. Stop resisting. And it will be easy. Warm. Calm. His words shocked everyone. There was no madness in them. Only weariness and a strange, frightening peace. Pavel, you must fight, Krulov said. We all must fight. It is not the plants that are talking to you. It is the anomaly that is affecting your brain. And if they're not, Ogertsov looked at him with glassy eyes. What if they're really alive? What if they just want us to join them? To become part of something bigger, something eternal? Zoran, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. I developed yesterday's photos. Would you like to see them? He handed Krulov a stack of photographs. What was on them made the blood run cold. In each subsequent picture, the figures of people became more and more blurred, transparent. The last shots were especially eerie. Only faint silhouettes were visible in them, like reflections in dark water. We are disappearing, Zoran stated with surprising calm. We are literally dissolving. We are becoming part of this place. We must evacuate immediately, Krulov said decisively. Let's gather only the essentials and leave. Right now. But when they tried to set up camp, it turned out that even such a simple task was beyond their capabilities. Their hands wouldn't obey, their heads were foggy, their coordination was impaired. What used to take half an hour now stretched out into hours. And they had no time. The worst thing was that the desire to leave was gradually fading. Each of them increasingly caught themselves thinking that maybe it wasn't worth suffering like this. Maybe it was worth just staying. The cave didn't seem hostile anymore. On the contrary, it was calm, soothing. The blue light beckoned, promising peace from all the worries and pain. Basov, having studied the latest instrument readings, made the final discovery. The anomaly is expanding. Its radius of influence is increasing every hour. We will no longer be able to leave its boundaries on foot. We simply do not have the strength to reach the safe zone. The words sounded like a death sentence. They were locked in, trapped in a trap that was slowly but surely sucking the life out of them. And with each passing hour, it was becoming harder to resist. Not just physically, but psychologically. On the evening of the fourth day, Shestakov made a final attempt to contact the outside world. He tuned the radio to the emergency frequency and transmitted a distress signal. This is the Ice Shield Expedition speaking. Coordinates 67 degrees north, 33 degrees east. Urgent evacuation required. The team is exhausted. We've entered an anomalous zone. The ice, it's alive. It's taking our strength. We can't get out on our own. Help us. Please help. His voice grew weaker and weaker, more and more broken. At the end, he was almost whispering into the microphone, and then he simply laid his head on the table and was silent. There was no answer. There was only silence. The dead, absolute silence of the polar night, in which the last sparks of human life slowly died out. And somewhere in the depths of the cave, the blue ice pulsed ever stronger, like the heart of a giant, invisible predator that was patiently waiting for its moment. The fifth day became the day of final enlightenment. Krulov woke up with the feeling that his body had turned into an empty shell. Every breath was difficult, as if the air had become thick as water. His body temperature dropped to 34 degrees. Vorontsova measured it with a medical thermometer, and the numbers horrified her. At such a temperature, a person should be in a coma, but his consciousness remained clear. Painfully, piercingly clear. Zoran spent most of the night in his makeshift darkroom, a corner of a tent covered with a tarpaulin, where he developed film. In the morning, he emerged with the face of a ghost. In his hands was a stack of photographs, wet with developer. The photographer's hand was shaking so badly that the pictures almost fell out. Valentin Sergeyevich, Zoran's voice was barely audible. You must see this. Everyone must see this. The rest of the expedition gathered around the camp table with difficulty. Ogurtsov was lying in his sleeping bag. He could no longer get up, only occasionally raising his head and looking at what was happening with absent eyes. Ermakov sat with his hands clasped around his knees and rocked quietly back and forth. Basov bent over his instruments, which were showing increasingly threatening values. Shestakov tried to tune the radio station, but his fingers barely obeyed. Zoran laid out the photographs in chronological order. The first pictures, taken on the day the cave was discovered, looked normal. People, equipment, ice walls, everything was clear, contrasting, real. But the further they went, the stranger the images became. Look, the photographer whispered, pointing to a photo from 3 days ago. Here's Igor's hand, holding the thermometer next to the ice wall. See? Everyone leaned closer. In the photograph, Yermakov's hand was slightly blurry, as if he had moved when the picture was taken. But this was no ordinary motion blur. The contours of the hand seemed undefined, fuzzy at the edges. A film defect. Ermakov weakly objected, but there was no conviction in his voice. Here's the next picture. Zoran put a photograph taken a day later on the table. In it, the same hand was already noticeably translucent. The blue ice of the wall showed through its contours. And here are yesterday's. The last pictures were terrifying. In them, the hands of all the expedition members looked like faint shadows, barely distinguishable silhouettes. And in the very last frames, oh my God, Vorontsova exhaled. Pavel is barely visible. In the photograph, Ogurtsov was captured lying in a sleeping bag, but his figure was so transparent that the floor of the tent was clearly visible through it. It was as if the young speleologist was turning into a ghost, slowly dissolving into the surrounding space. It's impossible, Basov whispered, but his scientific certainty had finally left him. The film can't. It contradicts all the laws of optics. Everything here is against the laws, Krulov said grimly. We are not dealing with a natural phenomenon. We're dealing with a life form that feeds on our life. Literally, it sucks out not only the energy from us, but the very materiality. We are turning into shadows. Shestakov tore himself away from the radio. In military archives, this is called the ghost effect. Several cases were recorded during the war in Finland. Soldiers did not disappear immediately. First, they became translucent, then they dissolved completely. Local residents said that they saw their silhouettes in the forest long after they disappeared. And what happened to them? Vorontsova asked. It is unknown, but the Finns claimed that these ghosts became part of the forest. They protected it from strangers. They lured new victims. Ogurtsov suddenly raised his head. His voice was weak but surprisingly clear. I see them. Those who were here before. They walked through the cave. Ancient people. The Sami. They tried to find a way out for hundreds of years. But they couldn't. Now they are part of the ice. Part of this place. And they are not alone. They are happy. His words shocked everyone. There was no dying man's delirium in them. There was a strange, frightening clarity. We must evacuate immediately, Krulov said decisively, trying to suppress the panic. right now, while we can still move. But as they tried to gather the bare essentials, it became clear that the evacuation would turn into a nightmare. Ogritsov couldn't stand up. Ermakov could barely stand up, his movements slow, like a man under heavy sedation. Vorontsova, always energetic and collected, had difficulty lifting even light objects. The worst thing was that the desire to leave this place gradually weakened. Each of them from time to time caught themselves thinking, why leave? It's quiet here. It's warm. No one is rushing. No one is demanding reports. You could just lie down and rest. Basov, having studied the instrument readings, made the final terrifying discovery. The impact zone is expanding. Every hour, the radius increases by half a kilometer. We are already in the center of an area 5 kilometers in diameter. To walk to the border on foot, we do not have the strength. How long will it take to reach the safe zone? Krulov asked. In our condition? 2 days, maybe 3, but we won't last that long. Shestakov tried one last time to contact the outside world. He tuned the radio to all possible frequencies and transmitted a desperate message. Mayday, Mayday. This is the Ice Shield Expedition speaking. We've fallen into a trap. The anomalous zone is affecting living organisms. The team is critically exhausted. Ogritsov is dying. The rest are losing their materiality. I repeat, we are literally disappearing. Coordinates 6704 north latitude, 3315 east longitude. Immediate evacuation by helicopter is required. We have a maximum of 24 hours left. If you don't come tomorrow, there will be no one to look for. Mayday, Mayday. His voice broke and finally turned into a hoarse whisper. There was no answer. The airwaves were dead silent. Zoran, who had been silently sorting through the photographs all this time, suddenly spoke up. Maybe we shouldn't resist? Everyone looked at him. Think, the photographer continued, his voice strangely calm. We've been fighting all our lives. With the cold, with fatigue, with time, with the bosses. And here you can just let go. Become part of something great, ancient, eternal. I saw them in my dreams, the ones who stayed. They don't suffer. They have found peace. Misha, what are you saying? Vorontsova was horrified. The truth, Zoran replied. We are already dying. Slowly, painfully. Or we could die beautifully. Become part of this museum, this eternity. Our images will remain forever in the ice, like those ancient plants. His words had the effect of poison on the others. Each felt agreement stirred deep in their souls. Yes, indeed, why suffer? Why fight the inevitable? Only Krulov still retained some remnants of the will to resist. No, he said firmly, we are scientists. Our duty is to bring knowledge to people, to warn them of the danger. We have no right to surrender. But even in his voice, there was doubt. The blue light of the cave, visible even from a distance, pulsed ever stronger. Each pulse echoed in their hearts, synchronizing their life rhythms with the rhythm of an ancient, alien mind. Ogritsov, who had been lying in a daze, suddenly opened his eyes. They glowed with the same blue light as the ice in the cave. They're calling, he whispered. They say the pain will soon end. There will be guardians. We'll protect this place from those who would harm it. It's beautiful. And in his voice, there was not the agony of a dying man, but the quiet, blissful peace of a man who had finally found his home. And somewhere in the depths of the cave, the blue ice pulsed ever stronger, like the heart of a giant predator, patiently awaiting its hour. That hour was already near. From a transcript of the audio recording of the portable tape recorder, Electronica 302. Attempt number 17. Check, check. If anyone hears this, Major Shestakov's voice sounded tired and hopeless. We're trapped. The coordinates? Fuck, I forgot the coordinates. Valentin Sergevich, what are the coordinates? 67, 405. I don't remember. Krulov responded weakly somewhere in the distance. It doesn't matter. No one will come anyway. We knew it from the very beginning. We knew what we were getting into. Shestakov laughed bitterly, and the laughter turned into a coughing fit. An official expedition, of course. We were sent here to die, so that we could see with our own eyes what's there in this damned hole. The devices show impossible values. Matter is disintegrating at the quantum level, Basov muttered indistinctly. Shut up, Oleg. No one cares about your devices anymore. Shestakov was silent. Anna left an hour ago. Or 3 hours. Who the hell knows? Tom doesn't work here. She said she was going to them. To those in the ice. She said they were calling. Herman, stop recording. Save batteries, Krulov asked. Why? We won't leave here anyway. I realized it yesterday, when I saw my hand in Zoran's photograph. It was transparent. Right through. I'm not a man anymore, Valentin Sergevich. I'm something between the living and the dead. A heavy silence fell. We must warn others. We must, Krulov said weakly. Who should I warn? Do you think we're the first? Do you think the command didn't know what awaited us? Shestakov laughed bitterly. There's a 10-centimeter thick folder in the KGB archives. All the same expeditions. All the same heroes of science. And they all disappeared. And we're just more guinea pigs. The ice is growing. 0.5 centimeter every hour. Soon it will reach the tent. To us. And then, Basov suddenly said clearly. At this point, the recording ended. Second transcript. Major Shestakov's last notes. Day 9 or 10. I don't remember. Valentin Sergevich left an hour ago. He said that he could no longer resist, that the ice showed him his wife and daughter. They were calling him home. A long silence. I'm left alone. Igor hasn't spoken for 2 days, sits and laughs all the time. Sees something that I can't see. They come. Every night they come. Anna, Oleg, Pasha, they stand by the tent and call. They say that it's good there, that there's no need to fight anymore. Shestakov's voice became quieter and weaker. Or maybe they're right. Maybe there's no need to suffer. Maybe it's better to just let go, become part of something eternal. There was a rustling sound, as if someone was getting up. I go to them. They call, promise peace. The sound of retreating footsteps. Silence. And then, far, far away, a voice began singing in an unfamiliar, ancient language. The singing continued for another 40 minutes, until the battery died. The Mi-8 helicopter was making its way through the snow swirl, its blades struggling to cut through the thick layers of Arctic air. Captain Boris Morozov, commander of the search and rescue team from Apatite, checked the coordinates on the map for the 3rd time in half an hour. The Ice Shield expedition had been silent for 8 days. The last communication session had taken place on December 9th, and since then, there had been complete silence. We'll land here, he shouted to the pilot, pointing to a relatively flat area at the foot of the rocky slope. The only way from here is on foot. The search party consisted of 6 people. Morozov himself, 2 experienced rescuers, a doctor, a mountain equipment specialist, and a communications operator. All of them were seasoned people who had been through fire and water in the harsh conditions of the Arctic. But even their hearts sank at the sight of this place. The landscape was dead. Absolutely, piercingly dead. Usually in the taiga, even in winter, there is a sense of hidden life. Animal tracks in the snow, bird calls, the rustle of branches. There was nothing here. Only white silence and a strange, oppressive feeling of being watched. The temperature is abnormal, reported Petrov, the group's meteorologist. -8. In December, beyond the Arctic Circle. It's impossible. They climbed the slope for almost an hour, following the GPS coordinates of the expedition's last signal. The snow underfoot was strange, too loose for such temperatures, and in places covered with a thin crust of bluish ice. Morozov, who had served in the Arctic for 20 years, had never seen anything like it. They found the expedition camp on a flat area at the foot of a rock massif. The scene that met their eyes was both ordinary and eerie. 3 tents stood untouched, neatly stretched and secured. Nearby were snowmobiles under canvas covers, boxes of equipment, a field kitchen. Everything looked as if the people had gone away for an hour or two and were about to return. "Hey, is anyone alive?" Morozov shouted. The echo bounced off the rocks and died away. The silence was absolute. They began their inspection with the first tent. Everything inside was in perfect order. Sleeping bags neatly laid out, personal belongings in their places, thermoses with the remains of tea. But the tea was frozen. Not just cold, it had turned into ice. At -8, this was impossible. "Look here," called the group's doctor, Sergei Volkov. He was standing by the field table where the diaries and notes lay. "The last entry is from December 8th. But look at the ink." Morozov leaned over. The ink in the notes was frozen. It had turned into blue crystals right on the paper, stopping the words mid-sentence. It was as if someone had instantly frozen the air in the tent to the temperature of liquid nitrogen. In the second tent, the picture was even stranger. The tape recorder was turned on. The cassette had been played to the end. Next to it was a camera with an undeveloped film and boxes with scientific equipment. All the devices were covered with a thin crust of the same bluish ice. "Where are the people?" Rescuer Kuznetsov wondered. 7 people couldn't just disappear. There must be traces, there must be something. But there were no tracks. The snow around the camp was untouched, as if no one had walked on it, or as if all tracks had been carefully erased. Morozov looked up and saw something that made his blood run cold. A dark opening gaped in the rock, the entrance to a cave. A faint but distinct blue light was streaming from it. Not a reflection, not a play of shadows. The light was coming from within, as if a giant fluorescent lamp was burning deep in the cave. "We shouldn't go there," said one of the rescuers, looking at the ominous opening. "They could have taken shelter there from the storm." Morozov objected, although he himself felt an irrational fear. "We have to check." They entered the cave with their flashlights on and their full gear. What they saw inside defied all explanation. The cave was enormous, the size of a cathedral. Its walls, floor, and ceiling were covered in ice of an unprecedented, rich blue color. The ice glowed from within, creating a ghostly, flickering light. Encased in the thickness of this ice, as in amber, were the silhouettes of ancient plants, giant ferns, strange trees, flowers of unimaginable shapes. But the most terrifying thing was something else. The expedition's items were scattered throughout the cave: backpacks, measuring devices, ropes, flashlights. But they had all turned into ice statues. Metal, fabric, plastic, everything was covered in the same blue ice, which seemed to grow from within the objects, turning them into crystalline copies of themselves. "Oh my God," Volkov whispered, approaching one of the frozen backpacks. It happened instantly. It was like time stood still. Kuznetsov picked up a Zenit camera from the ground. The body was covered in ice, but the mechanism seemed to still be working. There was film inside. "There may be answers here," he said, handing the device to the doctor, "if we can make it happen." But the most terrifying find was a tape recorder standing in the far corner of the cave. It was turned on, the tape was spinning, but there was no sound coming from the speakers. Morozov pressed the rewind button. The device was working. "Let's take it with us," he decided. "Maybe there's something important written there." They searched the entire cave, looked into every crevice, but found no living people. No bodies either. 7 people simply disappeared, leaving behind only icy copies of their gear. As Morozov emerged from the cave, he felt a strange sense of relief, as if a heavy weight had been lifted from his shoulders. But at the same time, he felt that something had changed. In the air, in his own body, in his perception of reality. As if the cave had left its mark on him. Already in the helicopter, on the way back to Apatite, the group's Dr. Volkov developed the film from the camera they had found. Most of the shots were ordinary expedition photos, landscapes, scientific documentation. But the last shots silenced the search group. One of the photographs showed a man in a winter jacket, reaching out his hand to a blue ice wall. The man's face was blurry, but the hand was completely transparent. The ice behind it was clearly visible through its contours. It was as if the man was turning into a ghost, slowly dissolving into the surrounding space. In the next frame, the same hand was barely visible, a thin, glowing outline, more like a trick of the light than a human limb. The last photograph was blank, showing only blue ice and a faint, barely discernible glow where the man should have been standing. "What does this mean?" Kuznetsov asked, his voice trembling. Morozov was silent, looking out the porthole at the mountains disappearing below. He didn't know what it meant, but he knew one thing. That place had to be cordoned off, forever, and no one else was to be allowed there. The transcript of the tape recordings, conducted in Apatite, yielded even fewer answers. The tapes contained fragmentary, incoherent phrases, recordings of radio conversations, and strange sounds, something between singing and moaning. At the end of the last recording, a voice could be clearly heard pronouncing something in an unfamiliar language that sounded like an incantation or a prayer. Experts were unable to identify the language, but a local Sami shaman consulted turned pale when he heard the recording. "This is the song of the dead," he said. "The song of those who have gone into the ice house and will never return. My ancestors knew this place. They called it Sit, the land where time ends. You can't go there. No one, ever." A week after the search operation, the cave area was declared a closed zone. The official reason was unstable geological conditions and the threat of collapses. Unofficially, a place where people disappear should remain forgotten. But sometimes the locals tell strange stories about a blue light that can sometimes be seen on that slope on particularly dark nights, about voices that can be heard in the silence, familiar voices of those who are no longer there, about how the cave is still waiting, patiently and silently waiting for new guests. And in the archives of the Ministry of Emergency Situations, there is a folder marked Top Secret. It contains photographs of transparent hands, recordings of strange voices, and a short resolution. The facility is subject to constant monitoring. Access is prohibited. No statute of limitations. KGB Colonel Viktor Simonovich Drozdov stood at the window of his office in Murmansk and looked out at the snow-covered hills that hid the place that had swallowed up 7 people 3 weeks earlier. In his hands lay a thick folder with case materials, and on the table were enlarged photographs with transparent silhouettes of people. Photographs that should not have existed according to all the laws of physics. Drozdov served in the organs for 20 years. He had seen a lot. Defectors who went mad from loneliness, secret experiments that ended in disaster, documents that could turn ideas about reality upside down. But he had never encountered anything like this. And, frankly, he hoped never to encounter it again. The report of the head of the search group, Captain Morozov, had been lying in front of him for a week. Dry, official phrases could not hide the horror that the rescuers had experienced in the cave. Anomalous physical processes, phenomena inexplicable from the point of view of modern science, a threat to national security. All these streamlined formulations meant one thing. They had encountered something that would be better forgotten. There was a knock at the door. "Come in," said Drozdov without turning around. Major Grigory Ustinov, his deputy for special issues, entered. He had another folder in his hands, the results of examinations and analyses carried out in the closed laboratories of Artemis 16. "Viktor Simonovic, we have received the physicist's conclusion," he reported, placing the folder on the table. Drozdov opened it. The very first line made him frown. "The presented materials cannot be explained within the framework of the modern scientific paradigm." He read on. "Atomic scientists, people accustomed to dealing with the most exotic phenomena of the micro-world, admitted their complete helplessness. Ice samples taken from the cave had a crystalline structure not found in nature. Under an electron microscope, it was clear that the crystals grew according to the fractal principle, each element repeating the structure of the whole, like a living cell. Moreover, the ice exhibited superconductor properties at temperatures at which this was physically impossible." "What about the records?" asked Drozdov. "Linguists have not been able to identify the language. But there's an interesting detail. The structure of the sounds corresponds to frequencies that affect the bioelectric activity of the human brain. Simply put, this is not speech. This is a direct impact on consciousness." Drozdov closed the folder. The picture was becoming increasingly ominous. They were dealing not with a geological anomaly, but with a form of intelligence. Alien, ancient, mortally dangerous for humanity. And this intelligence had already tasted humans. "What are Moscow's recommendations?" he asked. "Classify the object as especially important. Assign the code name Absolute Zero. Close access forever. All witnesses sign a non-disclosure agreement. Place the case materials in a special archive." Drozdov nodded. Standard procedure. Faced with something incomprehensible, classify, bury, forget. But he understood that in this case, it was the only correct decision. Some knowledge is too dangerous for humanity. Proceed with the implementation. And Grigory, he looked at the major with a heavy gaze, personally oversee the isolation of the object. Maximum level of protection. If this place is ever opened, the consequences could be catastrophic. A month later, a convoy of military trucks pulled up to the cave. The engineers, unaware of the true purpose of the operation, worked quickly and methodically. The entrance to the cave was sealed with 2-meter-thick concrete blocks. On top of the concrete was a steel grate and another layer of reinforced concrete. The work was carried out in gas masks and protective suits, officially because of the possible release of toxic gases. When everything was finished, all that remained at the entrance to the cave was a smooth concrete wall with a laconic inscription carved on it. Dangerous zone. Entry prohibited. Resolution of the USSR Council of Ministers number 1247, Sess of January 15, 1987. Local residents were relocated away from the anomalous zone. The official reason was the construction of a secret military facility. The area with a radius of 10 kilometers became a closed territory, patrolled by border guards. On topographic maps, it was marked as swampy terrain unsuitable for economic activity. And the ice shield expedition? Officially, it disappeared as a result of an avalanche. 7 coffins filled with sand instead of bodies were buried in a Moscow cemetery. Relatives were paid compensation for those who died in an accident while carrying out a government assignment. Top secret, one-of-a-kind copy. 5th Directorate of the KGB of the USSR. Case number 247 and final report. Based on materials from Operation Absolute Zero. Date, February 20th, 1987. Performer, Colonel Vez Drozdov. Based on the investigation and analysis of material evidence, the following was established. In the area of coordinates 67 degrees 5 minutes north, 33 degrees 17 minutes east, Kola Peninsula, a natural object was discovered that exhibits anomalous physical properties that cannot be explained by modern science. The object is an underground cavity, the walls of which are covered with crystalline formations of unknown nature, which have a destructive effect on living organisms. A scientific expedition of the Institute of Geology of USSR Academy of Sciences, consisting of 7 people, sent to study the object, went missing. Search activities yielded no results. The reasons for the disappearance could not be determined. The object exhibits the ability to expand its zone of influence, which creates a potential threat to populated areas in the region. Measures taken. The object was blocked by concreting and placed under constant guard by the Ministry of Internal Affairs troops. The surrounding area has been declared a closed zone within a radius of 15 kilometers. The local population, 47 people, was relocated to safe areas. All participants in the search and rescue operations have signed a non-disclosure agreement. Recommendations. The absolute zero object is not subject to further study by civilian scientific institutions. The possibility of research by specialists from defense research institutes should be considered no earlier than in 50 years, provided that appropriate technical means of protection are available. The case materials are to be placed in a special archive with the highest level of secrecy. Recommend the installation of additional means of monitoring the integrity of blocking structures. Special note: due to the exceptional danger of the object, it is recommended to exclude its existence from all open sources of information. In the event of accidental discovery of the location of the object by unauthorized persons, apply standard measures to protect state secrets. I approve. Head of the 5th Directorate of the KGB of the USSR, Lieutenant General I. Bobkov. The file containing file hashtag 247 and disappeared into the depths of the secret archives on Lubyanka. There, in the basements where thousands of other secrets of the Soviet state were kept, it took its place among files on UFOs, telepathic experiments, and weapons that should never have been created. Years passed. The Soviet Union collapsed. Regimes fell. Archives were opened. Many documents from that era were declassified. But case hashtag 247 and remained in a special repository, covered in the dust of oblivion. And somewhere in the forests of the Kola Peninsula, under tons of concrete and steel, an ancient, cold evil patiently awaits its hour. Locals still avoid this place. They say that on particularly quiet nights, a barely audible sound can be heard from there, something between singing and crying, a sound that penetrates not into the ears, but straight into the soul. And then you want to go there to the concrete wall, lean against it, and listen to this call from the depths. But few know that inside, under the ice, in the blue, flickering light, 7 ghostly silhouettes are still moving. 7 guards who guard the border between the worlds of the living and the dead. And they are waiting, patiently and silently waiting for someone to try to disturb their eternal peace again. And in the Moscow archive, in the depths of an iron cabinet, lies a photograph. It depicts a man's hand stretched out toward an icy wall. The hand is so transparent that everything behind it can be seen through it. On the back of the photograph, someone's trembling hand has written, "Remember us." And from time to time, when the archivist turns on the light in the basement, it seems to him that the figure in the photograph has moved slightly. But this, of course, is only a figment of the imagination. After all, the dead do not return. Isn't that right?